Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 31. Shen Li was called to the Demon Emperor's palace early the next morning. Upon entering the meeting hall, she saw the Emperor seated in his usual spot. Mo Fong stood to his side while many other soldiers were lined up in the hall. The Demon Emperor dismissed the soldiers with a wave of his hand and quickly got to the point after they left. Last night Rongjun ran to the mortal realm using the demon realm entrance. Shen Li glanced in surprise at Mo Fong. He swiftly bowed his head and knelt on his knee. "This is all my fault. I shall bear the full responsibility of bringing Rongjun back. Once back I will accept whatever punishment is necessary." "Why did he suddenly run away?" Shen Li asked. There was a distinct silence in the hall. "Did you beat him up?" She wasn't serious about the question, so was surprised when Mo Fong nodded. "I was drunk last night." He rubbed at the space between his brows helplessly as though he had a headache. "I wasn't paying attention and I kicked him a few times." Mo Fong hadn't changed out of the clothes he wore last night. The black steel boots he wore were specially made to handle harsh environments. They were incredibly tough and sturdy. Shen Li thought about Rongjun's baby soft, tender skin and realized the silly immortal must have really felt it. So he was beat up a little. Shen Li continued disdainfully. "What is he? A baby? He was beat a little and he ran away? Who does he think he's threatening with this silly ploy? There's nothing in the mortal realm that can harm him. Just let him come back when he feels like it." "That won't do." The Emperor handed Shen Li a letter. "Because of an urgent matter, the Heavenly Emperor has decreed that Rongjun must return to heaven in 3 days. Shen Li thought of the letter from the bar made a few days ago, and her stomach did a somersault. She had asked Ji to send it to the Heavenly Emperor on her behalf, but he had been so unenthusiastic about it she thought it would take some time to see any results. Ji must have sent the letter right away. Not only that, he must have added something else to it. Why else would the Heavenly Emperor react so quickly? Shen Li cast her eyes down. She wasn't sure what this feeling in her heart was. Rongjun must be found within the next 3 days, repeated the Emperor. "Fortunately we have time on our side. Time in the mortal world is faster, so 3 days here is the equivalent to many years there." Shen Li nodded. She looked at the remorseful Mo Fong, then at the Emperor and said, "So you want me to find him?" "Your Majesty. This is my fault. Please don't involve Her Highness." The Demon Emperor waved his hand at Mo Fong's outcry. "This delegation isn't just to bring Rongjun back, but also to give the children time to get to know each other. Remember, time proceeds faster in the mortal world. Lier, do you understand?" There was no way to avoid the marriage, so of course she understood. She needed to consider his feelings more. "I will get everything in order and set out immediately." Mo Fong wanted to argue, but the Demon Emperor's words echoed in his ears. He felt like a fishbone was stuck in his throat. Although he wanted to say something, he couldn't. As for General Mo's punishment for offending a superior, "Don't punish him. I told him he could beat Rongjun. If anyone is to blame, it would be me. I shall accept punishment once I return with Rongjun." Shen Li saluted the Emperor, turned, and left the hall immediately after saying this. Mo Fong, still kneeling on the ground, clenched his fist. The only person Shen Li spoke to regarding her departure was Roya. Since the matter had nothing to do with Ji, she saw no reason to inform him of her actions. When Shen Li entered the mortal realm, the skies were a clear blue and the breeze gentle. She drifted through the capital towards her tiny nook of the world on her cloud. She took a deep breath of the clean air and stretched out. She suddenly wanted to find some shade under the grape trellis he planted. She couldn't ask for more than to fall asleep to the creaking sound of his rocking chair. She exhaled and opened her eyes. In front of her was a strange alley. Everything looked different. Although she was told Rongjun had run in the direction of Yangzhou, she hadn't made it her destination. Instead she steered her cloud to the capital. She wanted to stretch and enjoy herself first. The last time she was here, she had been busy running from the Demon Emperor's men. She had had no time to play tourist, so this time around she wanted to take it slow and easy. She went to the market and meandered between the stalls. Nostalgia hit her and she made her way to Xingyun's courtyard. Everything had changed. The alleyway that led to his house was different. The house he lived in, that burned down, had been rebuilt in a slightly different style. It was inevitable, so many decades had passed since she left. She stood there in front of the gates for a while, watching the children run around. They were playing and laughing, making a general ruckus and disturbing the peace. This was certainly not a scene she would have ever seen in his courtyard. He had always preferred peace and quiet. It really had changed a lot. Next stop, the Rue Palace. It was opulent and majestic, with more pavilions and such, but otherwise it was the same palace. The only difference was the change in ownership. Shen Li felt the sudden urge to see the lotus plant and the pond. She wanted to know what happened to Prince Rue and his consort. She transported there with a twirl of her fingers. The pond had been filled in and a house had been built on top. Ah! It's gone. Shen Li silently studied her surroundings. The decor had changed to suit the new owners, and there were no traces of Prince Rue left. Things and people fade with time, but Shen Li was unwilling to accept it. For her, everything had only happened months ago, yet there was nothing left of what she remembered. It felt like she was being abandoned as the world moved on. What was more, there was no Yun in this world. It made her feel like he was an illusion. It frightened her, so she sought confirmation. She appeared inside the Imperial Records building with another twirl of her finger. She thumbed through the records. Prince Rue managed to assassinate his brother and take the throne. His princess refused to accept the empress title, instead choosing to follow the solitary path of Buddhism. King Rue had known she wouldn't accept the title. There was nothing else written about him. Perhaps because there was nothing distinguishing about his rule for the scholars to record. Shen Li stared at the ink strokes on the pages. There was no record of Xiaohe. It was like she never existed. Perhaps the king had forgotten about her. After all, many people died for him. What was one silly demon girl? Shen Li slid her fingers across the words until they stopped at the title, National Teacher, Xingyun. Xingyun had guided King Rue, becoming his most trusted advisor, and yet he had no official title or rank. It was only after his death that Prince Rue conferred the title of National Teacher upon him. The 4 words were the only traces left of him in the world. Flipping to the next page didn't give her any more information, as it was about those that came after. Shen Li laughed. What was she even looking for? Even if the whole world forgot, what did it have to do with her? She only knew him because he was a part of her life, a part of her memories. Whether others remembered him, whether he really existed, didn't matter because he was gone now. It wasn't like she could get the past back. Shen Li touched her forehead, then shook her head and laughed. How could she have lost her head like that? Such an action was unworthy of the Azure Sky King. Shen Li left the palace and headed to Gongqing. After a few steps she paused and did an about-face. She walked to the market and picked up 2 bottles of wine and leisurely walked out of the capital. She stopped at the outskirts by a river and sat down. How long does High God intend on following me? A person clad in white billowy robes emerged from behind a tree. In embarrassment, he sat down next to Shen Li. How long have you known? If I wasn't aware of my surroundings, I would have been struck down ages ago on the battlefield. Shen Li held the other bottle out to him. Xingji laughed and took the offered wine. The silence between was broken when they both spoke. Yesterday, High God, Xingji laughed at that. I wanted to apologize about yesterday, but you had already left for the mortal realm by the time I woke up this morning. So I followed you here. The river they were sitting by was a rapid one with white bubbles and foam. It twinkled and sparkled under the light of the sun. He looked at it and sighed. In a tone he was unaccustomed to using, he said, "I'm sorry." He was not one to apologize, so it came out a little rusty. Shen Li had always been more susceptible to coaxing than coercion, so Xingji's apology took her by surprise. After a moment of stunned silence she said, "It is fine. I was bullying Rongjun too much, it was fair he got angry. The demon emperor has reprimanded me about it. I know I was also in the wrong." This time the silence between them wasn't so awkward. Shen Li suddenly pointed to a spot in front of them. She spoke with renewed determination. "See that spot? Once not long ago, I was sprawled over there completely helpless in my demon form. I was exhausted and couldn't move a single muscle. I have never been in a more difficult or embarrassing situation in my life." Shen Li said this, but her eyes shined with happiness. She turned to Xingji and her heart turned a little sour. "I never told anyone this, but when I was taken back to the demon realm, I felt like I was renewed, redeemed, like I had met a legendary hero." "How about that?" "The first time I saw a hero, and he turned out to be an ordinary mortal that I could have easily choked and killed. It was probably then that I set my heart on him." It was the first time she had been so calm and clear-headed in front of him. She waited for him to say something, but when he didn't she continued. "High God, Xingyun, I'm not stupid." For a while, the only sounds between them was the gurgle of the river as it rushed downstream. The stalemate was broken with Xingji's laughter. "So you saw through it, eh? Welcome to my channel, this is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 32. The day was getting late and the setting sun cast a brilliant glow on the surface of the water. It was a gorgeous view rarely seen in the demon realm. Shen Li drank her wine as she gazed at the water. "I have suspected it for a while, but I couldn't figure out why you would want to go the lower realms, and as a mortal at that." Xingji shook his head. "You get bored when you live as long as I have. And when you're bored you do strange things. I went to the lower realm with the desire to incarnate as a mortal and experience the ordinary life of a commoner." Xingji gave a helpless laugh. "I drank from the river and I gained an ordinary body, but my god knowledge could not be erased." Shen Li looked at Xingyun in surprise. She had not expected him to drink from the water of forgetfulness. Unfortunately, one bowl was not enough to wash his memories away. That was why he knew so many arrays and was able to see the spirits of the dead even though he had no magical aura. No mortal body can bear the burden of a god. No wonder you were so sickly. Shen understood now. "But since you remembered, why did you pretend not to know me?" Xingji glanced at Shen Li out of the corner of his eye. "The same reason you left for the demon realm with Mo Feng and the demon emperor." He hadn't wanted to delay her on his behalf. Besides that, as Xingyun, he hadn't replied to her declaration before she returned to the demon realm. It was only more awkward after returning and meeting her again as Xingji. Shen Li understood he couldn't reciprocate her feelings, so had pretended they were strangers in order to douse any lingering affections. She looked down. Sever all ties of affections, huh? Shen Li laughed then sighed. So what you were trying to do was make me not like you. You know, your behavior was the complete opposite. You were acting like a man trying to seduce someone. Is he really that unaware of himself? Were you seduced? Asking a question like that when he was trying to cut off relations, this guy was too reckless. Shen Li spoke into her wine bottle. How is that even possible? High God is thinking too much of it. How can I, the Azure Sky King, behave so inappropriately? That time in the mortal realm, I met and fell for an ordinary mortal named Rongjun. That was in the past. Now you are an ancient high god. How could I possibly feel the same way about you? Rongjun retained an aloof smile, but his hand had tightened into loose fists. Shen Li continued. Your current identity is too troublesome. Like the prince who had to kill his brothers to gain the throne. Prince Rui loved his princess, but in the end, in order to produce an heir, he had to accept an imperial concubine. He didn't do anything wrong, it was simply something required of him, because of his identity. If one day we were to meet on the battlefield, I wouldn't just be Shen Li, I would be Shen Li the Azure Sky King. Xingji stared at Shen Li with a fixed gaze as she continued. The marriage to unite the demon realm and the heavenly realm should be happening soon. What I want to say today is just this, you are unwilling to be Rongjun, so Rongjun doesn't exist for me anymore. As far as I am concerned, Rongjun died in the mortal realm long ago. The you facing me now is the immortal high god Xingji, so there is no need for further subterfuge on your part. Shen Li, from the start, both identities have always been mine. Rongjun was simply the mortal him in the mortal realm. His body changed, but he was still the same person, with the same memories. He didn't want Shen Li to see him as two separate individuals. Shen Li resisted this idea. Shaking her head she said, as far as I'm concerned, you are two different and distinct individuals. Xingji, you and I do not share a fate, nor do we have anything to do with each other, so you need not be concerned about any lingering feelings on my end. Shen Li held her wine bottle up next to his as she solemnly spoke. Immortal High God Xingji, as the Azure Sky King, I will obey the heavenly edict and marry Fu Rongjun. She tapped her bottle with a clang against his. It was a crisp sharp sound that echoed all the way to the pit of his stomach, before finding its way to his heart and bleeding into a thread of pain. It left him silent for a moment, then with a slight smile he said, Indeed, Your Highness, that would be good. The sun had set, but the afterglow still colored the sky. Shen Li finished her wine bottle and threw it into the river. It made a crack sound as it broke into pieces. The sound was like a resounding firm punctuation for their conversation. Shen Li stood up and dusted herself off as she said, The gates should be closed, but I have no desire to return to the capital. My plan is to head to Yangzhou, to search for Fu Rongjun. Where does a mortal high god plan to do from here? Xingji didn't answer, so it was silent between them for a couple of seconds. The silence was broken by the sounds of footsteps behind them. Both knew it was impossible for it to be mortal footsteps. The feel and sound were too heavy. Shen Li surveyed the land. The waters were shallow, but the grass was high. Combined with the dimming sky, it would be easy to stay hidden. One look at her face and Xingji could tell what she was thinking. Why hide? Shen Li glanced at him. Don't you feel it? She focused on the dam farther down the river. The air just turned strange. It's not something good. Dusk was a time when evil manifested in the mortal realm, so Shen Li was more alert. She had yanked Xingji over and hid in the grass. Still, did you really have to pull me along to hide with you? I don't think I need to hide. He looked bemusedly at her hand holding his on the top of the grass. Ah. How could she forget? Even when he was the weakling Xingyun, he was ridiculous enough to tease the crown prince about his weight. No matter how benign his expression, he was still the same impudent person. Shen Li coughed lightly and pulled her hand back. She had talked big earlier, but her action just now was that of a person protecting another. She had unconsciously reacted to the situation like he was that same sickly, weak-bodied mortal she used to know, instead of an incomparable high god who everyone in the three realms would bow to. The sound startled the group of 4 people walking along the river bank, one of whom had his wrists tied behind his back. His head was covered in a huge scarf. The shape seemed to suggest antlers. Remembering where she was, she called out, "Hulu." The person did not reply, but the tremble that shook his entire body at her call confirmed her suspicions. Though Hulu did not have heaven's mandate, he was an immortal earth spirit, a minor land god. The group holding him captive were clearly not soldiers of heaven, so who were they to dare capture him? They were dressed entirely in black from head to toe, even their faces were covered. Shen Li furrowed her brows and approached to query. Their leader pulled his sword and attacked before she could ask. Shen Li didn't have a chance to show off her spear's fearsome abilities, when from over her shoulder a column of water rushed past. With a crash it slammed into the attacking man and drenched him in water. A sudden cold air that sprang from the ground. He was rooted to the spot as ice crystals formed from the combination of chilly air and condensed water. The other 2, upon seeing this, decided to flee. Xingji waved his hand before they could take a single step, and they, like their leader, were also rooted in place. Shen Li raised her brows. Ice spell? No, water-limiting spell. Shen Li wasn't familiar with all the different types of water spells, nor was she impressed by any of them. They all sounded the same to her. She strode over to Hulu and pulled the fabric covering his head. A trail of light wound around his antlers, much of his head, mouth, and neck like a collar. Shen Li frowned. What kind of spell is this? Xingji looked down and thought. An immortal binding spell. He formed a ball of light on his fingertips and pressed it lightly against Hulu's bindings, breaking the seal. Freed, Hulu bent over at the waist and took a great big gulp of air. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he looked at the 2 people in front of him. Thank you. Thank you, great immortals, for saving my life. I thought for sure I would die. Hugh. Hugh. Shen Li's lip quirked at the corner. This big crybaby hadn't changed one bit. She and Xingji waited for him to finish crying. Hulu wiped his face with his arm after the flood of tears stopped. He gasped once he got a good look at his saviors, specifically at Shen Li. You're. Shen Li nodded. Yes, I am. But don't worry, this time I'm not here to coerce you into doing anything. She pointed a finger at the 3 men. What's going on with them? Who? It's a long story. It all started when someone from an immortal sect came and started trouble. Hulu sighed. 3 months ago a person named Fu Xingmen came by representing some immortal sages from a school. I guess it was some well-known sect in the martial world. We didn't care who they were, but they set up a banquet and invited us to meet with them. A bunch went, but none came back. Another banquet invitation arrived and another group went. They never came back either. By then we were all leery of them. No one accepted the 3rd invitation. Who would have guessed when we said no, they would forcefully kidnap us? Xingyan narrowed his eyes. What you describe is a serious crime. Why have you not reported it to the heavens? Hulu cried out in grief, we wanted to. The first messenger we sent was found dead in the woods. The next was also found dead. There were never many of us to begin with, so between that and the banquet, there was barely anyone left. Everyone scattered. Hulu got teary-eyed just thinking about it. The woods around the capital aren't that big. I was afraid I'd be caught if I stayed, so I went and hid in the city. I was able to stay hidden until today. That's when they caught me. If it weren't for you two, who knows what would have happened to me? Shen Li was confused. You're a land god with an immortal body. Your magic isn't strong, but it shouldn't be that weak. Why are you such a pushover? Why is everyone able to do what they please with you? Hulu gave Shen Li an aggrieved look. It's not that I didn't resist, there were other immortals with strong magic who tried to resist too. But the other side has some magic that specifically deals with immortal beings like us. We can struggle as much as we like, but we can't break free. I heard from other immortals that the magic this sect uses doesn't resemble normal immortal magic. He looked at Shen Li and hesitated for a moment before continuing. It was like a demonic technique. Welcome to my channel, this is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 33. Demonic technique? Shen Li wrinkled her brow. The demon realm had been under heaven's jurisdiction since the end of the 1,000-year war. The boundary dictated by heaven was firmly enforced by the demon emperor, so even if the demon people didn't like it, they couldn't disobey. Despite this, there were those in heaven who suspected the demon people had evil intentions and were simply biding their time, waiting for a chance to strike back. However, because the demon emperor took great pains to enforce the boundaries, there had been no issues between the realms, thus nothing for heaven to complain about or latch onto as evidence. This would change if immortal beings were being kidnapped. If a link, no matter how dubious, could be drawn to the demon people, the already suspicious people of heaven would jump to conclusions and pass a guilty judgment. The reputation of the demon emperor and his people would be tarnished, and the already tenuous peaceful relationship between the two realms would crumble. Shen Li thought it would be great if the feigned friendship between the two realms fell apart and they could stop pretending to be nice to each other. However, she had an issue with being used. Undo the limiting spell, Shen Li said to Xingji as she walked to the group of men clad in black. She said this, but before he could do as she asked, she had already broken through the ice, grabbed one of the men by the scruff of his neck and punched him to the ground. He lay in a fetal position, clutching his belly. She promptly kicked his legs out and sat on his stomach, then she forced his mouth open to keep him from committing suicide. I'm going to ask each question once and only once. Refuse to answer, and I will cut your finger and force you to eat it, so take stock of how many fingers you have. Xingji knew from the coldness in her eyes she was serious. She was a king of the demon realm after all, so her ferocity was not in doubt. The man under her trembled, wanting to escape, but Shen Li was like an immovable 1,000-pound weight. Who do you work for? The veins on his face bulged, and he looked like he was choking. Since he refused to answer, Shen Li moved her hand to his waist and reached for the dagger sheath there. She slid it out and pressed the blade to a finger, ready to slice it off. The man squeezed out the words, "Gate guard." Before Shen Li could ask the next question, his face turned a ghastly purple. The already bulging veins on his face expanded and pulsated like worms. Their movement grew in intensity until his eyes bulged out. A whinny sound of pain escaped his throat before a loud pop erupted from his head. The brunt of the blood splatter landed on Shen Li's hands, but some still managed to make it to her face. She glanced down at the body underneath her before tossing the dagger away and standing up. Bones and flesh disintegrated into sand, spilling out of his clothes like an overfilled bag. What a malicious death curse. Answering questions will cause you to blow up. With a grave expression, Xingji turned to the other men in black only to find their eyes closed in suicide. Apparently they didn't want to die the same horrible death their comrade suffered. Shen Li turned to follow his gaze. With a frown she said, "We lost our only lead. I once overheard about a lake." Hu Lu hesitated but pushed forward. "The immortals being kidnapped are being held in a cave near a cliff that's covered with green vines. It's by a huge waterfall. The only place that fits that description is Qingya Cave." Shen Li was quick to reply. "Let's go. We'll rescue any immortals we find and figure out our next steps afterwards." Xingji muttered some things to himself before speaking out. "We should disguise ourselves first. Let's change clothes so it'll be easier to approach the cave. When the time comes, Xing, you take care of them with your spellcasting and I'll take care of them with my fists." Xingji nearly laughed at her words. He picked up a stick and tapped her forehead lightly with it. "What is wrong with your brain? Always so violent." Shen Li distractedly touched the spot he tapped and turned away without saying a word. Xingji had been careful how he behaved around her, but all that care went to waste with that single action that made his personality shine through. The way he touched her, the way he spoke, they were identical to the other jerk. The mortal him rejected her, but the immortal him was seducing her. What was with him? She wanted to beat him up for unsettling her heart so much. Shen Li was still stewing when she felt her clothes morph into the same black outfit the men wore. Xingji had changed both his appearance and his clothes to resemble the leader as well. Now he gave off a competent, heroic air, instead of that of a lazy loafer. "Ahem, let's go," said Shen Li after clearing her throat. Hu Lu led the way to the cave. The idea of passing through the waterfall made Shen Li's scalp prickle with discomfort, but she swallowed any complaints and followed behind Hu Lu. She was expecting to get wet, but not a drop of water landed on her. She looked up to find a golden barrier above their heads. She turned to Xingji, but he was staring intently ahead into the darkness. He stepped inside and she followed behind like nothing had happened. They continued down the dark path until they reached a vermilion door. Earlier, Hu Lu had told them about the monster that lived in the area. Because of its easy temper, it easily coexisted with the other immortals in the area. Both sides minded their own business, so there were no problems. No one expected the cave would become a prison for the immortals. Shen Li's group didn't stand in front of the door long before it opened a slit and a voice from within asked, "Password?" It was a cold and unwelcoming voice. The three of them had come disguised in the right clothes, but they didn't know the password. Xingji could tell Shen Li wanted to kick the door down, so he immediately gripped her hand and shook his head. Xingji was disguised as the leader of the group and he had brought his stick with him. He limped closer to the door, making the person guarding it on the other side nervous. The guard cautiously asked, "What?" "Gate guard." Xingji imitated the dead man's voice perfectly. The one behind the door visibly relaxed and opened the door for them. Xingji looked to Shen Li and said, "Now," letting her do what she had been itching to do all along. She shifted inside and knocked out the guard and his companion with a swift chop to the neck. Xingji turned to Hu Lu and said, "Return to the woods. We will release the other immortals imprisoned here." Hu Lu wasn't so sure about that plan. "They're really powerful, will you guys really be okay? I can stay with you and help." The offer made Xingji smiled, but Shen Li was openly disdainful of it. "Huh? You should just worry about yourself. Xingji placed the stick in Hulu's hand. It's all right. We'll be fine. Take this stick for protection. You're welcome. Hulu stared at the stick in his hand. How am I supposed to defend myself with this tiny stick? Shen Li stared at it. For an ancient god, he sure is stingy with his gifts. Xingji overheard this, and his smile faded. What? Where are my thanks for finding the clues and rushing over to help? Even if I haven't succeeded yet. I still came. As long as he doesn't lose it, no one within 100 miles will be able to touch him. They left Hulu behind and continued onwards. Eventually, they reached the end of the passageway and entered a cavern. It was a huge space with 10 floors embedded into the walls. The water on the floor cast a green light that lit the entire cavern up. Immortals were held in individual iron cages all along the wall, straight down in a line. Light, like the one that imprisoned Hulu when they found him, encased each cage. A guard was patrolling the area, unaware of their presence. Shen Li wrinkled her brows. How do we save them? Xingji laughed. Like you said, I'll handle the magic. You handle the brute force. He waved his hand as he said this, and a golden light snaked forward to the cages, weaving in between the restricting white light. Break, he said in a low voice that still somehow resounded throughout the cavern. The light responded to his voice, and the spell binding the cages broke. Taking that as her cue, Shen Li formed her spear and flew to the cages, destroying each lock quickly and easily, releasing the immortals inside. Alerted, the guards rushed over to attack, but they were no match for Shen Li, and she dispatched them in no time. The immortals all bowed their heads in gratitude. It's not safe to stay here, Xingji said. Let's leave first and talk later. Upon reaching the outside and seeing the light again, many immortals wept in joy. They thanked Xingji again for rescuing them. Strangely enough, no one approached or thanked Shen Li, not that she noticed. They would have continued to ignore her had she not asked, "Do you know where the first immortals were caught?" This question made them turn to her. No one answered for the longest time. Finally, a young man pointed at her and heatedly said, "You demon! You dare have the audacity to ask?" The person next to him immediately grabbed the hem of his robe and tried to pull him away. She also saved us. Come on, don't act that way. Shen Li frowned. I will only say this once. The matter with immortals being kidnapped has nothing to do with my people. I only incidentally learned about it today. Like hell you did. Now that the joy of being freed wore off, he gave vent to his anger at being kidnapped and imprisoned. You demon people are barbaric, evil villains. This time you captured us in the mortal realm. What next? Do you plan to go to heaven and kidnap those immortals too? Every single one of you are disgusting criminals. And that includes your stinking demon emperor, Dash. Shen Li lifted him up by the collar before he got through his sentence. Such impudence. The Azure Sky King will cut you to pieces. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 34. The man in Shen Li's grasp was so scared by the sight of her red eyes that he almost fainted. The immortal next to him was likewise really frightened. He quickly apologized to Shen Li, urging her to release his friend, however Shen Li was too angry to hear his pleas. Instead, the guy she was holding turned blue as her grip tightened. This was not good, so Xingji called out to her. Shen Li glanced at Xingji. Although she didn't release her grip, she did loosen it enough for the man to breathe. Cruel, barbaric, savage. As soon as he got some air, he commenced talking again. Shen Li turned to him and gave him a cold smile. I wasn't going to kill you, but since you've worked so hard to convince me, I'll do you the favor. Aren't you lucky? Shen Li tightened her grip further, causing his color to change from blue to purple as he foamed at the mouth. Out of fright, the other immortals cried out in alarm. Xingji reached out to her and touched her hand, but he didn't force her to let go. All he said was, hurting him will make things more difficult for the people of the demon realm. Shen Li gnashed her teeth. This person is full of venom, spewing slander against my people and insulting my emperor. Now I can't even maim or kill him. It's hard for me to settle the anger in my heart. Shen Li. Xingji sighed helplessly. Shen Li didn't understand why it was bad to give vent to her anger by hurting the immortal in front of her. He and his kind constantly badmouthed her people with malicious gossip. It was frustrating to constantly be told to endure. She roughly tossed the immortal onto the ground, then walked away, kicking the shrubs in her path as she did so. The other immortals rushed to aid their fallen comrade. He was dizzy and slightly bruised, but otherwise unhurt. They still felt the need to complain. He only said a few words, such uncalled for anger. The demon people really have no empathy, so unforgiving. Shen Li was amazed at the irony of the words coming from the group of immortals. Empathy? She laughed, a laughter filled with chi. The force shocked the immortals and shook their hearts, forcing them to cover their ears from the power. Isn't it because I empathized with you that I came and rescued you? In a fit of anger, she had continued speaking with chi in her voice, and she would have continued some more had a hand not swiftly covered her mouth. All the chi was pushed back inside, making her take a step back in surprise. She bumped into Xingji when she did so. His chest was warm and his aura wrapped all around her. It was like a cool breeze had blown in and dispersed her resentment. All that remained was a stuffed-up feeling in her chest that left her feeling flustered. My friends, just because those who captured you used demon magic doesn't mean someone from the demon race is involved. This could be a deliberate attempt to undermine the relationship between the two realms. My friends, I hope you do not listen to idle gossip and assist the villain inadvertently. Shen Li felt the vibrations in Xingji's chest as he talked. It had a lulling effect on her, and she zoned out without realizing it, but her annoyance came back upon seeing the immortals in front of her nodding along to what he was saying. She pushed his hand away from her mouth and struggled out of his embrace. Once successful, she turned around and gave him a glare before walking away and kicking the rocks and grasses underfoot like an angry child. Xingji shook his head lightly and smiled as he watched her walk away. He continued, I won't keep you all in the dark. I stayed in the demon realm with the demon people for several days not too long ago. They are not a bloodthirsty race. The people are straightforward and direct. If the act of kidnapping immortals in the mortal realm was meant to start a war, then they would have prepared for it with the appropriate military preparations. I saw no evidence of this at their military camps while I was there. The gathered immortals mulled over what he said. A white-haired old man of the group touched his beard and spoke. As far as I know, the only immortal who visited the demon realm recently was the Heavenly Emperor's grandson, Rongjun, who is wedded to a person in the demon world. Could it be the woman who just now proclaimed herself to be the Azure Sky King is Rongjun's wife, from that rumored married couple? Xingji's brow twitched slightly, and he glanced over at Shen Li. Shen Li had not heard the old immortal. She was some distance away from them, leaning against a tree and looking at the waterfall. The corner of Xingji's mouth arched up slightly. It was incorrect to call Shen Li and Rongjun a married couple. Rongjun and the Azure Sky King are not yet wed. Ah, if Great Immortal says so, then it must be the case. The Azure Sky King is deeply dedicated to the demon people and cannot stand anyone speaking poorly of him. What happened just now was simply because she is short-tempered. I hope everyone can forgive her. Xingji smiled as he continued. She is a very direct and honest person with a righteous nature who approaches matters with a sincere heart. That kind of conviction and morality, even I cannot beat. The old immortal tugged at his beard. Great immortal is very good to the king, unlike in the rumors, ha ha ha. His sentence trailed off in awkward laughter. Xingji's smile drooped a little, but he remained silent. Well, she is worth it. Xingji asked the group of immortals some more questions about their kidnapping before letting them disperse and return to their respective territories. It was unlikely their kidnappers would appear again so soon, so they wanted to use the opportunity to report to heaven. Xingji walked to Shen Li after everyone left. He didn't have to say anything, she knew he was there. She glanced quickly over at him and asked, "Are they gone?" Xingji nodded. It seems like there is still another group that needs to be rescued. I don't know the specific location, but it should be somewhere in the south. This is your business. It doesn't have anything to do with me. Go and save your people by yourself. I'm going to Yangzhou. Immediately after saying her piece, she walked away. Xingji trailed behind her. Stop following me. Xingji gave a helpless smile and shrugged. Yangzhou is also in the south. We're heading in the same direction. Shen Li was silent for a moment, but eventually resumed her walking. There was still lingering resentment in her heart, but her pace wasn't as fast as it was before. The distance between them kept getting smaller and smaller until finally they were walking side by side. Xingji shot a glance at her. Hungry? Shen Li was reluctant to admit it, instead she said, no, just before her belly betrayed her with a low rumble. It made her frown and Xingji smirk. Now she was even more annoyed. She called forth a cloud to ride away, but he grabbed her wrist and interrupted her. There's a small family-run restaurant down the mountain. Why don't we go there? It's been a while since I've had any of the 5 grains. I miss them. Perhaps Xingji's mortal life as Xingyun influenced his immortal preferences. Shen Li eyed him dubiously. You do? I do. Xingji nodded with a smile. All right, let's go then. The restaurant really was in fact just a stall by the side of the mountain. The sign in front read, tea. It was a good resting place for travelers. There were even a few tables and stools outside for people to sit and enjoy a drink. Shen Li barely sat down when a middle-aged woman approached. Would the 2 of you like tea? Please sit, sit. Auntie, we've had a long journey and we're hungry. Can we borrow your kitchen to make something to eat? The woman blinked, a bit taken aback. What do you want to eat? I'll make it for you. Xingji laughed. This sister here has really picky tastes. It's difficult to please her. We'll pay you for the use, of course. The lady silently thought it over for a moment before replying. Let me clean up a little first. Here, in the meantime, have some tea. She poured them both a cup before hurrying back inside. This is a suspicious shop. Shen Li stroked the cup as she said this. Is your highness afraid? Shen Li raised her head and drank the tea in one gulp. Upon returning, the woman was surprised to find her new customers still sitting upright in their chairs. She pushed the flicker of hesitation that went through her mind aside and put a smile on her face as she approached them. Everything is in order, young master. Please, this way. She picked up the teapot and was shocked at how light it was. It had to be at least half empty. She looked at Shen Li and Xingji in astonishment. This made Shen Li ask her if something was wrong. Nothing, nothing. I was just surprised you weren't tired after walking around the mountain. You must have a lot of stamina. I'm fine. It wasn't anything much, just killing a bunch of monsters. Something flickered in the woman's dark green eyes. My goodness, young miss enjoys joking a lot, I see. Shen Li wasn't as patient or as calm as Xingji. She reached over the table and grabbed the woman by the neck. I'm not one to joke. She reached for the teapot with her other hand and poured the liquid into the woman's mouth. The woman only succeeded in swallowing more liquid in her desperate struggle to break free. Shen Li was relentless. She raised the woman higher and shook her harder until her limbs shortened and a tail sprouted behind her. It dragged to the ground as her skin smoothed into a different kind of flesh. The woman resembled a python. Shen Li tossed her to the ground and shouted in a cold voice, "All of you come out at once, otherwise I will kill her." A girl crawled frantically from out of a haystack as soon as Shen Li said this. I'm coming. I'm coming. Please don't kill her, yelled the girl in a fuzzy voice. Her lower half kept transforming, alternating between a snake tail and human legs. It made her gait unsteady, and she kept falling and smashing her face into the dirt. Xingji smiled. He was about to speak when Shen Li stepped forward and helped the girl up. She patted the girl's dirty cheeks, not at all minding the dust. In a happy voice she said, "Xiao He." The girl looked at Shen Li confused. Her voice shook, and she stuttered because she was so afraid. I'm not Xiao He. I'm sorry. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 35. The girl was shaking like a leaf. Shen Li thought it best to just release her. In her happiness, Shen Li forgot Xiao He had sacrificed herself for the one she loved, that even if she looked like Xiao He, this was her reincarnated form, so she would have no memory of her previous life. Unlike Xingji, who retained his memories, she would have lost hers. Without that memory she was freed from the past. In this life, she didn't know Prince Rue or the heartbreak of that love. Shen Li was silent for a moment, then she took a step toward the girl and asked, "Your abilities aren't even that great, yet you dare set up a stall like this to harm others? How brazen. Aren't you afraid the mountain god will punish you?" With her head lowered to her chest, the girl whispered that the mountain god was gone, captured some time ago. Xingji and Shen Li shared a glance. When? Did you see who did it? Shen Li probed. Her voice came out unintentionally sterner than she meant it to. It scared the girl, and though her lips trembled, she refused to say more. Really? I didn't even beat you this time, Shen Li sighed in disappointment. From her side, Xingji laughed. The sigh made the older woman exert a great amount of effort to look up from the ground. In a hoarse voice she asked, "Great immortals, you are sparing our lives?" Shen Li had only shaken her twice, but it was enough for her to understand the disparity in their strengths, so she was very respectful when she spoke. Neither my child nor I wish to engage in such a malicious trade, but we were forced to do so, because we had no other choice. We've only robbed passers-by of their money. We take what we can, but we've never physically harmed anyone. When did you put up the stall? And why were you compelled to do so? Shen Li asked. Thinking about it made the green-eyed python sigh. This child's father is immortal. Together as a family we used to live in the forest surrounding Yangzhou. It was a hard life, but we got by on the food he grew and the game I brought back from the mountain. Then 3 months ago something strange happened. The trees started withering away and the grass stopped growing. Thick miasma spread everywhere and nothing grew. I'm sure it's related to the mountain god's disappearance. It clearly made her anxious just remembering. The mountain god disappeared. The other supernatural being said the god was taken away by someone named Fuxing Men. Shen Li wrinkled her brows, that name again. It seemed, although he was from a small immortal sect, he was a rising power, capable of not just kidnapping immortals around the capital, but also using demon magic. Even Shen Li began to doubt her conviction. Did someone from the demon realm really break through the barrier and enter the mortal realm? I had to take this child and hide here. There wasn't anything to eat. Out of desperation, we came upon the idea of robbing passers-by of their money and any food they had with them. What about your husband? Xingji quietly asked, not concerned about Fuxing Men. He's not here with you, so how is he getting by? The woman hesitated for a moment before forwarding forward honestly. He was a Taoist priest before we married. Things were peaceful and we lived together without incident, but he never laid down his duties. When the miasma spread down the mountain, he had me and our daughter leave the area while he and his disciple went to Yangzhou. He said the miasma would be difficult to deal with and it would affect the city. Shen Li was speechless at the revelation. This woman was in a relationship with a Taoist priest and they had a daughter together. Their identities were so different. It must have been incredibly difficult for them to remain together. She couldn't help but admire the green snake. Xingji spoke up in Shen Li's silence. Since that's the case, why don't we go to Yangzhou? I'll treat you to a meal another day. He smiled slightly at Shen Li as he spoke. The intimate tone of his voice made Shen Li stare at him. She turned away and coughed. Great immortal. The daughter suddenly spoke up. Won't you take me along as well? I miss Dad and I miss Brother Yan. Her cheeks blushed out of embarrassment. She said this. A girl so young wouldn't handle the miasma well. Xingji was about to refuse, but Shen Li spoke up first. Okay, let's go. She turned around and glanced at Xingji. Can you give her a talisman ward? Though it was phrased as a question, it was clear she wasn't interested in discussing the matter. Xingji looked at Shen Li in surprise before laughing out loud. He walked in front of the girl and drew several letters on her forehead. Finished, he said, let me know if you feel unwell once we enter the city. The girl nodded gratefully. Her body slowly changed into a tiny snake and she crawled into Shen Li's sleeve. She peeked her head out and looked up at Shen Li. With a laugh Shen Li said, okay then, let's go. Though the sun was setting as they reached Yangzhou, there was no beautiful sunset to behold. Black miasma fog shrouded the entire city. Shen Li felt like she was stepping into the demon realm. According to the girl, all the immortals around the city had been kidnapped. Miasma flowed out from the forest surrounding the mountains and settled in the city, leaving it in its current shrouded state. The once vibrant city was a dead shell of its former self. Sickness pervaded, affecting both old and young. There were only a few hardy individuals able to walk the streets. Shen Li frowned. Those in the demon realm have adapted to the miasma, but for ordinary mortals, it would be unbearable. The girl in Shen Li's sleeve trembled in fear. Shen Li stroked the snake's head. Don't worry. We'll find your family. After walking along the streets for a bit, Shen Li asked, is there a way to get rid of the miasma? Yes, however the miasma comes from the mountain. Clearing it here would only address the symptom, not the root of the problem. Xingji was interrupted before he could finish. Fix the symptom first, take care of the cause later, Shen Li cut in. Slowing it down is better than nothing. Shen Li barely finished talking when a person rushed out to her. His hair was poofy like he'd been electrocuted, while his entire body, from his clothes to his skin, were completely ashen. Finally, someone came. He was practically crying tears of joy. Someone came at last. "Who are you?" asked Shen Li. He wiped his face with one hand, nearly in tears again. "Ah? I'm Fu Rongjun." He used his filthy clothes to wipe his grimy face. It didn't help. He only smeared the grime around more. He pointed to his face. "I'm Fu Rongjun." Shen Li frowned in disgust. "Go away. I don't have time for you." Fu Rongjun looked around and saw Xingji, so he didn't overdo it, only saying, "That's over line. How can you treat this lord like that?" Fu Rongjun patted his chest. This lord risked his life to save the city. If it weren't for this lord hurrying to Yangzhou, everyone here would have fallen to the miasma. This lord did what he could to control the situation and purify the city. How can you treat me like so? Xingji looked up at the sky. There are traces of purification in the air. The confirmation dissipated Fu Rongjun's anger, but he still felt wronged. In a sad voice, he said, "This lord encountered such a thing while strolling. How could this lord not help? This lord tried to purify the miasma to the best of his abilities, but it wasn't enough. In less than a day the miasma returned and pervaded the city again. Then at the same time a great number of people fell seriously ill. It was too much to manage the miasma and the sudden eruption of sickness. Those not seriously ill, this lord gathered and brought to the temple in the north side of the city. This lord set up a boundary circle to keep the miasma out, but lately the miasma has been so dense this lord has reached his limit. You could have reported this to heaven. The only reason you didn't was because you were afraid they would take you back, so you figured you would just try to clean the miasma here on your own. But now that it's beyond your abilities, you're trying to shove the responsibility onto someone else?" She shot him a glance after laying his motivation bare. "The nerve. To claim you saved the city." Fu Rongjun nearly choked at her words. He was slightly embarrassed at having been called out. There was a flash of green and a girl suddenly appeared in front of him. Her unstable legs caused her to stumble into Fu Rongjun's arms. She hastily pulled back and asked, "Great Immortal, inside the city, did you see a Taoist priest and his disciple?" Such a soft sweet voice. Even if his eyes were filled with dust and the city dark and dimly lit, Fu Rongjun could recognize a beauty when he saw one. He gave her a quick once-over to confirm. "Of course. This lord set up the boundary inside the city after all. Can you bring me over to them, please?" "Of course." Fu Rongjun extended his hand toward her. "But the miasma is a hindrance. Take care where you step, it's hard to see here." Shen Li picked she up by the waist and tossed the girl over her shoulder. "Lead the way," she said to Fu Rongjun. Fu Rongjun resentfully glared at Shen Li's cut, but he turned around and did as told. Shen Li thought Fu Rongjun was just a useless skirt-chasing fool, so she was surprised at the extent of the boundary he created. It was large enough to protect several hundred people. Those inside the boundary welcomed Fu Rongjun with big grateful smiles on their faces. Fu Rongjun turned around proudly to look at Shen Li as if seeking affirmation of his accomplishment and virtuosity. She turned her head away, refusing to indulge him. She looked around the encampment distracted as the other people came over and bombarded Fu Rongjun with praise. "Great Immortal is amazing. Great Immortal is such a good person." It made Fu Rongjun laugh in happiness with his hands on his hip. She spotted two people in the corner of the temple. Running over she yelled, "Dad! Brother Yin!" Shen Li looked over in their direction and was stumped at what she saw. Xi's father was indeed an ordinary Taoist priest, but Brother Yan bore an uncanny resemblance to King Rui. Laying prone beside him was a sleeping sick woman. She looked remarkably like King Rui's wife. They appeared to be the same people from the previous century. She rushed excitedly over to them. "Why are you so loud? Can't you see people are sleeping?" Yan reprimanded her. She stared in silence, feeling like she'd been wronged. She shifted from foot to foot before walking over to her father's side, lightly tugging at his clothes. The interaction between the three made Shen Li ask if their fates were bound to repeat. Xingji shook his head. "It's just a coincidence." The aggrieved look on Xi's face reminded Shen Li too much of Xiaohe. She couldn't help but speak out. "I'm sure Prince Rui had many people in his life after he took the throne. What were the chances of him remembering a sharp-tongued woman who sacrificed everything to help him gain his desire? Let me think." Xingji thought it over before answering. After he became king and assigned an empress, he planted lotus flowers all over the royal garden. Shen Li gave him a quick glance in surprise. She didn't expect him to answer. It made her sigh. "It's useless now, but I'm sure Xiaohe would have been happy if she knew." Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 36. Xi's father looked sternly at Xi. "What happened to your mother? Why are you here by yourself?" She pinched her dad's sleeve. She felt really wronged. Mother suffered a minor injury. She was worried about the miasma affecting her, so she didn't dare come with me. How willful of you. He yanked his sleeve away from her grasp. No fear of the miasma at all. Leave here immediately. She had overstepped. She looked at Brother Yan and saw he wasn't paying attention to her at all. Her throat tightened and she couldn't speak. Unexpectedly it was Rongjun who interrupted the silence. He walked to Xi and stuck one hand out between them, creating a space for himself to step in. Like a skilled diplomat, he said, "The enchantment circle will protect all those inside from the miasma. There is no need to drive your daughter away so soon. Taoist priest, please do not blame her. She was simply worried about your well-being and was eager to see you." Rongjun turned around and looked at Xi after he finished speaking. The bright shining way she gazed at him melted his heart. His eyes softened and he unconsciously smiled. The warmth showed through despite his ash-smeared face, making Xi very grateful someone was on her side. Xi's father had nothing more to say after Rongjun spoke. Shen Li crouched in front of the sleeping girl and studied her face. Her lips were nearly black and there were distinct glowing bluish-green lines crisscrossing under her fair skin. They pulsed and gave the impression there were bugs underneath. Was the epidemic caused by the miasma? Yan glanced at Shen Li, unhappy she would disturb the woman's sleep. In a rude tone she continued. "What? You don't know? What are you doing with her then? Let someone else who knows what they're doing take care of things." She turned to Xingji. "I'll have to trouble High God." Xingji sighed at her behavior. He understood it was her way of getting justice for Xi. No matter the situation, Shen Li would always be Shen Li. She couldn't bear to see someone suffering unfairly and not doing something about it. However she felt about something, whether she liked it or not, would rise to the surface and show in her behavior. With these thoughts in his heart, Xingji walked over to the sleeping woman. After observing her carefully, he read her pulse. "I will see the other patients now." His expression was heavy. He circled around the temple, checking people before returning. With knitted brow, he turned to Rongjun and asked, "Your Highness has been here several days now. Can you tell me which direction has the greatest miasma density? Fu Rongjun thought about it before replying. The west side of the city. The southwest is particularly lethal. Shen Li muttered something to himself. If I'm not wrong, the miasma isn't flowing into the city from the outside, but rather is flowing out of the city to the surrounding area, and has been doing so for quite some time. This surprised everyone within earshot. The Taoist was the first to disagree. That's impossible. I live a secluded life in the mountains, but do come to the city to buy supplies. I was here last month and noticed the miasma clinging to the outside of the city walls. There was no miasma beyond the walls and inside the city then. The sickness here isn't an epidemic caused by disease, but the result of blood flow crossing the wrong way. It's symptomatic of too much miasma inhalation. He pulled his sleeve up and showed his arm. Faint bluish-green marks were visible. I was careless several days ago and allowed the miasma to enter my body. Once inside, it will remain for some time. These are the marks of its presence. Shen Li recognized they were the wounds from the time he was ambushed by the Yaoshou in the ruins. Shen Li hadn't said anything about them, so she hadn't realized his wounds hadn't healed fully. This kind of mark, aside from being injured by beings that emit miasma, can also be found in those who inhale the miasma all year long. Physical symptoms appear once it reaches a certain concentration level in the bloodstream. Shen Li pulled his sleeve back down. The disappearance of immortal beings, the mysterious immortal sect, the profusion of miasma, the answer may lay in the western part of the city. Shen Li's main concern was the demon realm. It was possible the cause could implicate her people, so she wanted to resolve everything as soon as possible. Let's going to the west side. To Fu Rongjun, she said, guard this place well. The miasma grew increasingly heavy and toxic as she approached the west side of the city. Despite taking precautions against it, Shen Li could barely move. She spoke to Shen Li beside her. If the culprit is from the demon realm, then I will ask you to allow me to deal with that person. Shen Li was silent as he considered her request. She didn't think there would be an issue with it, so his reply was unexpected. That won't be possible. This matter involves too many land gods. Heaven will want to investigate. Shen Li nearly missed a step at his words. She turned around and looked at him. He still had the same faint smile he usually wore, but his eyes were resolute. In that moment, Shen Li saw the real Shen Li. He was normally carefree, but when it came to heavenly matters, he wasn't going to budge. That's fine. Shen Li nodded. It can be a joint investigation, was her compromise. To that, Shen Li did not reply. By then they had reached the area, and the miasma was intense. Breathing was nearly impossible. Even Shen Li, as accustomed as she was from living in the demon realm, felt unwell, never mind ordinary mortals in the mortal world. She scanned the city wall, but couldn't see where the miasma could have originated. All she felt was the overpowering heaviness it emitted. We've reached the west walls, but there's nothing here. Shen Li reached over and pulled a strand of her hair. Although it didn't hurt, it was a strange thing for him to do. What? She asked. He smiled at her question as he nimbly shaped her hair into a butterfly. I'll show you the trick. Shen Li released her hair and it fluttered lazily through the air, having changed into a white butterfly. It soared through the miasma, cleaving a trail of clear air in its wake. A red door, much like the one they encountered when rescuing the immortals held captive in the cave on the outskirts of the city, emerged from the wall. See? Now it's here. Shen Li shot him a side glance. Next time pull your own hair. She materialized her spear as she stepped to the door. There was no doubt in her mind it had to lead to Fuxing Men's headquarters. She wasn't the least hesitant or polite, kicking the door, intending to open it with one swift kick. Though the panel shook, it remained firmly closed. Shen Li was about to try again, this time with chi in her kick, but before she could, a loud thwomp sounded and the double doors opened wide. The miasma released hit her square in the face. White butterflies, matching the one from earlier, shot past her ear. No longer erratic, they flew with intent and great speed to the door. Like before, they dissipated the miasma in their wake. Shen Li went in ahead and stepped into a grand hall, fitting of an imperial palace. It was hard to believe the door hidden behind magic camouflage could lead to such a beautiful place. There wasn't much time to admire as the moment she stepped through, black-clad figures emerged from the walls like ravenous monsters intent on killing their prey. Shen Li cut every one of them down with her spear, severing their heads cleanly and easily. Her face was a blank mask as she fought, not heeding the blood splattering around or the drops dripping from her spear. She would not forgive anyone who slandered or dishonored the demon realm. She mercilessly killed everyone in her path. When she couldn't continue straight anymore and faced a fork in the hall, she grabbed one of the men and indifferently hit his chest hard, aggressively ramming chi into his body and rupturing his internal organs. He stood dying in front of her. In a voice that sounded like it came from hell, she demanded, "Where is your master?" The man was truly frightened and was shaking all over. Right. Where does the left go? The land gods. Shen Li released him, but before he could even turn to run away, she grabbed his hair and threw him against the wall like a rag doll. Just like that, his life was snuffed out. Xingji came up behind Shen Li just as she did this. His brow furrowed. Killing with such bloodthirst is not good, even if the other is an enemy. The blood that ran down her spear had already stained her hands red. She coldly looked at Xingji. Don't bother preaching. The left path leads to the imprisoned immortals. High God will have to go down that path alone. I intend to capture the culprit behind this. I only hope that High God is willing to do a joint investigation of the matter. The demon realm is innocent. Please do not let the heavenly immortals run away with unjustified speculation. This made Xingji wrinkle his brow. Shen Li turned and took the rightward path. He stared at the path she took for some time before turning and taking the left path. The frequency of attacks increased dramatically as Shen Li neared the final room. Once there, she forced it open with her spear. Light poured out of what appeared to be the main hall of a temple. She looked around from the doorway before entering. Though it seemed empty, she still proceeded inside cautiously. Not a single of the black-garbed guards were in sight. The silence was only broken when the ground shook. Shen Li had to readjust her footing as she looked upwards. 3 massively brawny men dropped out of thin air from above. They surrounded Shen Li in a triangle formation. She stared at them, assessing. They looked sinister with sharp wolf-like fangs and red eyes that lent them an air of savageness, making them resemble animals more than men. They roared at her, covering her with spittle and a raw metallic smell. Shen Li was outwardly calm, but her heart had been rocked. She had never met such opponents before. They were like men transformed into beasts. At first, the 4 stared at each other in a stalemate, with neither party making a move. Finally, one rushed forward. Shen Li lifted her spear and pointed it directly at his eye. Instead of avoiding her attack, he continued forward and grabbed the blade of her spear. He used brute force to pull the spear out of Shen Li's grasp. His hand was sliced open and gushing blood, yet he didn't seem to notice. He roared and tried to bite her neck. Shen Li stared in shock. She liked fighting, but even she had never seen someone use so much brute force. She successfully defended against the bite, but her back was left open. Taking advantage of the opening, another man attacked. The blow landed hard and forced her into a roll. She barely had time to catch her breath and summon her spear back to her hand. The formation broke and the three men were now between her and the door. She was effectively trapped inside. These three were proving difficult to handle. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 37. Shen Li coolly eyed her adversaries. Everything about the three temple men exuded murderous intent. Their fang-like teeth showed through their open mouths while saliva pooled and trailed down their lips, creating wet spots on the floor. Shen Li glanced at the temple man that grabbed the blade of her spear earlier. The gash on his hand had already healed to the point the wound was no longer visible. He was monstrous, like the scorpion-tailed fox she had beheaded near the ruins. Shen Li knew they would attack soon when she sensed the change in the air. Her red-tasseled silver spear shook and suddenly flew and attacked the man in the middle. He gave a cry of alarm, but it was no use. The attack was impossible to dodge and he was stabbed square in the face. He reached up to grab the spear. Shen Li wasn't about to let him grab it like before. She was mentally prepared this time, so when he reached for it, she immediately somersaulted forward and twisted her body around to slam into him. This caught him off guard and allowed her to easily attack. She grabbed her spear and thrust it forward, intending to chop his legs out from under him. Although she used all her strength to strike, she failed to slice through his legs. All she heard was a solid metallic doom as her spear vibrated from the impact. The vibrations were so strong it nearly broke the skin on her hand. It was unimaginable to Shen Li that, despite using all her strength, her spear failed to cut through. It had accompanied her through scores of battles, across oceans and lands, and never failed her before. In shock, she flipped backwards, retreating to a safe distance with the spear in front covering half her face. To be fair, the spear was originally made for stabbing, and not so much for cutting and slicing. However, Shen Li had used it for so long that it had become imbued with her qi and become freakishly strong, capable of more than just stabbing. In fact, the shaft of the spear could even be used in place of the blade to behead a person. But now she could see a small nick at the edge of the blade. The other two didn't wait for Shen Li to gather her thoughts. They flanked her on both sides, before rushing her like ravenous wild dogs. She wanted by some time to think of a strategy to defeat the men, so she jumped up and perched on a beam out of their reach. She hadn't thought of a plan yet when a silhouette jumped up even higher. He had his hand out to hit her head, but she dodged it with a minor tilt of her neck. She grabbed his hand and poured qi into her grip. A loud cracking sound came from his hand as every bone broke. He raised his head and gave a loud shout, leaving his center unguarded. Shen Li grabbed the opening and thrust her spear into his gut, but hard muscle prevented her from stabbing deeply. At this, Shen Li shouted as well and rays of light glowed from her spear. It increased in intensity until with a crack and a plush her opponent's chest exploded, raining flesh and blood down onto the floor. She shoved the rest of his body down, yanking her spear out as she did so. He fell like a boulder, crashing into the wall, before falling to the floor and leaving a crater in his wake, finally dead. Shen Li was gasping for air, but she had managed to take one man out. Before she could catch her breath, the two men below jumped up to her perch, with one on either side. She raised her spear in time to block an attack from one, but was smacked by the other. The force behind the hit was so powerful she was knocked off the beam and into the first dead man's crater. The two jumped down and landed with a thud on the ground, raising a tremendous amount of dust and debris into the air. They couldn't see Shen Li since her body was completely obscured, so they had to walk to the side to peer in. Red light flashed through the rubble. Before either man could react, Shen Li's spear pierced one through the eye. He stood dead with the blade protruding out from the back of his skull. Shen Li sliced his head in half when she swept her spear to one side to free it. Dust scattered as his ruined body fell to the ground. There were no visible injuries on Shen Li's body, but there were strands of blood on her lips that trailed down the front of her. Her eyes were cold and bloodshot. She wiped the blood from her lips, with one arm whispering to herself as she did so. That really hurt. She had only taken one blow, but her entire body ached like her joints were broken. Even breathing was difficult. It was hard to believe 3 unknown men could force her into such a terrible position. She stepped forward and glared at the final temple man left standing. Through the metallic taste of blood in her mouth she said, "Since you want to fight, be prepared to fight to your last breath." He let out a roar that echoed through the hall. Everything shook, even the brick in the walls crumbled. The muscles on his body rippled as they expanded. He stepped over his dead comrade and dashed at Shen Li. She didn't try to dodge, having already predicted his movement. Instead she jumped up and aimed the tip of her spear at his head, intending to pierce him from above. However, he made an unexpected move in blocking the spear with his arm, allowing it sink into his flesh. The attack didn't seem to hurt him at all though. He smashed his unencumbered hand into Shen Li's face, but she moved out of the way just in time. She coalesced chi in her hand and forced it into the downward thrust. The wind resulting from their 2 opposing forces rattled the temple and shook the bricks. Shen Li dropped to the ground with her hand supporting her body and swung her leg up into the air like a scissor. She wrapped it around his neck and twisted him to the side, slamming him into the wall. The stone masonry crumbled away from the impact, revealing a hidden room behind. A person, dressed entirely in green with a strange air around him, stood behind the wall, looking down at the scene of Shen Li's battle. The temple man crashed into the wall, shook his head before standing up. The man in green gave him a kick, knocking him back down. Shen Li looked at the face of the man in green as though she was looking at an evil spirit. "You are the one pulling the strings. You're the framing the demon realm. Why are you doing this?" "Frame?" the man in green said as he moved in the shadows. Shen Li couldn't see him clearly, but his voice sounded familiar. "You can't really call this me framing anyone." Shen Li frowned. She was about to go after him and demand answers when the man, who was knocked down earlier, finally got up. He roared as he shook the debris off his body. This really was indeed fighting to one's last breath. "A troublesome person is about to arrive, so forgive me for not staying to watch to Azure Sky King longer." Shen Li stared at the play of light and shadow on his face as he turned away. He reminded her of someone, and she suddenly thought of the person leading the attack that night at Xingyan's courtyard. What was his name? Fu Xing. Fu Xing. Fu Xing men. But how was that possible? He was an ordinary person, so he shouldn't still be alive. Shen Li was anxious to chase after him, but the fallen man from earlier blocked her path. His eyes were full of cold malice as he roared, "Prepare to die." He only spoke those 3 words before Shen Li sliced his eyes with her spear. She hurriedly leapt away from him towards Fu Xing. She wanted to capture him no matter what. Unperturbed, Fu Xing calmly waved his sleeve in her direction. Shen Li didn't notice anything amiss at first, but a few seconds later her vision turned black and her body froze up. She toppled over. The last temple man jumped over to Shen Li and proceeded to pummel her abdomen with both fists, as if he was trying to shatter her internal organs. Done with that, he lifted her up by the neck, trying to choke her to death. Before they had been on the ground amidst the debris. Shen Li stared after Fu Xing's back as he gradually disappeared from sight. A sense of powerlessness came over her as she endured the attack. Despite her high tolerance for pain, blood gurgled out of her mouth and poured down the front of her, dyeing the hands of the temple man red. What's going on here?" An extremely cold voice sounded from the hall's entrance. The temple man turned and saw a figure in white standing by the entrance. He roared and used Shen Li as a weapon, hurling her at the newcomer. Shen Li had no control over her body, but she suffered no injuries despite the throw. It was as if a hand was supporting her back, twisting the momentum away from her as she spun towards the entrance. By the time she could see clearly again, she had already settled into Xingji's embrace. Shen Li had a strange thought when she saw Xingji's blood-stained clothes. She was constantly staining his clothes, wasn't she? Fortunately, she wouldn't have to help wash them this time. Wasn't it more troublesome than slaughtering the Yao Shou? "How many injuries did you receive?" His tone was low, filled with an anger Shen Li had never heard before. Shen Li shook her head. The man behind it escaped. Xingji persisted. "How many injuries?" Shen Li didn't answer, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. She wanted to tell him her injury wasn't life-threatening, that it was more important he not miss this opportunity to chase after the mastermind. The reputation of the demon realm and the demon emperor rested on this. She didn't want her home to be maligned. Xingji held her wrist to read her pulse. As if to proclaim his presence, the temple man roared while rushing to them. The added noise from his large body trampling over the ground only made it harder for Xingji to read Shen Li's weak pulse. Xingji glanced over at the temple man, and with an expression as cold as ice yelled, "Get lost." All movement immediately ceased. The once fluttering dust particles stopped moving and dangled in place. Meanwhile, the temple man was completely frozen, locked in mid-stride. It was like time had stopped in ice. Witnessing the power of the words nearly made Shen Li nearly pass out. She stared distractedly at the high god in front of her. She understood now how powerful a spell when uttered from Xingji's lips could be. He went back to listening to her pulse. It was so quiet that Shen Li could hear her own weak but accelerating heartbeat, however she chose to ignore both it and Xingji, not giving a voice to the subtle change. Xingji failed to pick up on it. All he could tell was that something was wrong with her body. Frowning, he said, "You've been poisoned." Shen Li could see her reflection in his eyes. Her mouth was severely bruised and her face was deathly pale. In a weak voice she said, "Poison can't hurt me." The mastermind. Shen Li had barely finished speaking when the sounds of chanting rang out in the room. It started softly but then rose in pitch. The volume made Shen Li's head ache and she involuntarily clenched her teeth. Xingji could see something was wrong from her expression. He asked anxiously, "What is it?" "Sounds." Xingji's expression turned cold. It was obvious whatever it was only targeting Shen Li. Suddenly a noise came from behind them. Turning around, Xingji saw a man with a partially sliced head crawl out from the rubble of bricks. A second man, the one Shen Li had smashed to death, fell from the crater in the wall. Both men were covered in blood. They ignored Xingji's presence, acting as though he wasn't there, like they were obeying someone's command. Shen Li's fingers tightened, flexing unconsciously, when she saw them. She attempted to get up but was held in place by Xingji. Pressing her down by the shoulders, he spoke in a cold and severe voice. "Do you no longer wish to live?" Shen Li twisted her mouth at his words. "It's because I wish to live that I must rise and fight." Xingji pursed his lips. A feeling he couldn't keep in check floated up from the bottommost part of his heart. He didn't bother turning his head, but instead simply drew 5-point configuration. A loud sound, like the roar of the early morning, erupted. The previously smoggy air cleared up as extremely clean, pure air flowed from Xingji's body. Bright light shot out and burned everything around them to ashes. I will keep you alive. A muddled-headed and confused Shen Li felt a murmur rise in her heart. She couldn't resist muttering before passing out, before Xingji, there wasn't anyone. Xingji's grip on Shen Li's shoulders tightened as he gazed at her. It was hard to gauge his mood from his dark eyes. Welcome to my channel, this is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 38. He understood the importance of apprehending the mastermind, and he knew Shen Li wanted him to give chase as it would help prove the demon realm's innocence, and yet he couldn't walk away. His grip unconsciously tightened as he stared at the pale face of the woman in his arms. She never painted her lips red or lived her life like other women. She was strong and had never hid behind anyone's back. She was much like the red-tasseled silver spear she wielded, forceful and unyielding. As she said, there was no Xingji before, no one who could protect her. She was used to relying only on herself, to fighting alone, to guarding and bearing the burden of the demon realm alone. To see such a formidable woman in such a weakened state was both strange and distressing. She was like a cat that liked to reach out and lazily scratch at his heart with her claws. By the time he noticed those lazy scratches of hers, it was too late and the scratches had become itchy and painful. It was a hard-to-describe feeling. This person, so troublesome. The 4 words drifted from his lips into the empty room. He remained where he was, cradling Shen Li against his chest. She carried the unused medicine box as she followed Rongjun around the exterior of the temple. He had allowed her to be his personal attendant. She's martial arts skills were not great, so it took a lot of effort for her to keep her tail hidden. She quietly called out to Rongjun. At her call, he turned around with a bright smile on his face. He asked, "Tired, sweetie? Want to rest?" She wanted to hand the medicine box to Rongjun. "Great Immortal, I very much want to help, but I'm afraid I might accidentally change into my true form." "That won't happen," Rongjun replied, still beaming as he circled around her. "This Lord's power has imprinted on your body. It is absolutely impossible for your form to shift." Saying as much, he opened up a broken fan and teasingly toyed with she by puffing a bit of wind at her legs. It was an ambiguously playful motion that was suggestively flirty. She blushed in embarrassment and took 2 steps back. Rongjun wore a carefree smile as he advanced 1 step forward his target, his fan still open. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Yan wedged himself in between them with a black sword pointed at Rongjun's chest. This made Rongjun take 2 steps back. "Great Immortal Rongjun, please conduct yourself appropriately." Yan only said the single sentence, before grabbing the medicine box in Shi's hand and hurling it to the ground. Then he grabbed her wrist and pulled her back into the temple. Rongjun's face turned green. "Ah. So you would let your lover touch you like that, huh?" The words stunned Shi. She looked at Yan only to see him barely turn his head to the side. In a cold voice he said, "I and little Shi have no such feelings for one another. I ask that Great Immortal not slander little Shi's good name." He tugged at Shi's hand to pull her back, but she refused to move. He was incredibly annoyed as he looked at her. "What are you still standing there for? Do you want to stay here and be taken advantage of?" She tucked her head down, feeling the reprimand was unfair. "You're being so fierce." Yan furrowed his brow. He was about to speak when a clamor by the temple gates caught his attention. He saw a white billowy figure hurriedly carrying a bloody figure into the temple. The man's voice was low, but it resonating loud and clear. "Where is Fu Rongjun?" Fu Rongjun had also noticed the scene. He immediately became respectful and hurriedly followed behind Xingji into the temple. What happened? She was also curious. She craned her neck to see what was going on. Yan watched as she followed Fu Rongjun with her eyes. It made him unhappy, so he moved his body in front of her to block her view. "Do you want others to take advantage of you? Great immortal Fu Rongjun is a good person." Yan's face turned extremely ugly. "Shut up." She mumbled to herself, "I didn't do anything wrong, why are you so unhappy? You're being so hard on me for no good reason. You should just go back and take care of that other person." Yan shot She an uncomfortable glance. "Little She. I do have my reasons." She turned her head away. "Whatever Brother Yan does is right. There's always a reason, and I'm always wrong." She quickly walked away after saying her piece, leaving Yan to stare blankly after her. Meanwhile, inside the temple, Fu Rongjun was staring at the blood-covered Shen Li in shock. How can she be so injured? Instead of answering, Xingji carefully laid Shen Li on the ground. Then he held her right wrist, listening to her pulse. "Hold her left wrist and perform the divine purification spell." Fu Rongjun didn't dare be slow. He immediately complied and held Shen Li's left hand. He was shocked the moment he touched her skin. Her body temperature was perilously low. On top of that, there was something indescribable rushing around inside her body, mixing with her blood. He couldn't tell if it was poison or some kind of spell. He muttered apprehensively, "It was only a while ago that you left. How did this happen? It may be better to wait and confer with someone better versed in this matter." "She doesn't trust you." Xingji spoke softly. He knew Shen Li wouldn't trust Fu Rongjun or anyone from the heavens. Had her injury not been so severe, he knew she would have chased after the mastermind with a tenacious stubbornness. Fu Rongjun ground his teeth. Even though the divine purification spell was already initiated, he couldn't help but grumble. This guy is not the least bit feminine. She's not lovable. I have no sweet feelings for her at all. Is there anyone who would dare marry and take such a crazed warrior woman home? Xingji glanced up at Fu Rongjun. His words left a sour mark in Xingji's heart. He had bestowed the marriage as a gift after all. He curled his lips as he tilted his head down to look at Shen Li. In the quiet of the temple, Fu Rongjun thought he heard someone softly say, "There is." He stared up at Xingji confused, but Xingji's expression was the same benign one he always wore. The other didn't dodge his gaze, so Fu Rongjun wondered if he misheard. After all, Xingji was an unfeeling god that even his sister, Luo Tian, couldn't tempt. How could someone like that have any feelings of tenderness toward a woman as masculine as Shen Li? Shen Li's injury was more serious than Fu Rongjun initially thought. It took them all afternoon just to stop the bleeding and bring some color back to her skin. She no longer looked like someone knocking on death's door. Fu Rongjun relaxed as things improved. He asked, "High God, what kind of monster had the ability to injure the Azure Sky King like this?" as he directed the chi in Shen Li's body. Fu Rongjun's impression of the king was that of a bloody monstrous general that no one could take down. It really shocked him to see her in such a vulnerable state. "This matter with the immortals may be more complicated than expected," Xingji muttered. "The mastermind behind it all is still loose. Furthermore, I don't know if there are any other conspiracies. Shen Li is severely poisoned. It's not a good idea for her to return to the demon realm in her current condition. The best course of action is to rest for tonight. Early tomorrow morning you should go to the demon realm and tell the emperor about the situation so he can mentally prepare himself. After that you must return to heaven. This is a grave matter, so you should not delay. Fu Rongjun blinked. Me? Go? He was somewhat unwilling. It was with great difficulty that we resolved the matter with Yang Zhou. But I didn't have any time to play. Xingji looked Fu Rongjun in the eyes. With a smile he said, "My lord wishes to have some fun? Would you like me to call forth 2 divine creatures for you to play with?" Divine creatures from the heavens beyond the heavens were not to be trifled with. People, even immortals, couldn't handle them, much less survive playing with them. Fu Rongjun quickly nodded his head. I will leave tomorrow. However, there are still many in Yangzhou who have inhaled the miasma. What should be done about them? I have already cut off the miasma's origin. The 4 cardinal seals have also been restored to their proper state. The miasma will eventually peter out on its own. As for those sick patients, I have a solution. Xingji checked on Shen Li's complexion before continuing. There is no other issue here to resolve. Go and prepare to leave early tomorrow morning. Fu Rongjun curled his lips unhappily. He turned away and left looking for Shi. The sound of his voice drifted inside as he called for her. Catch, Shen Li whispered. She opened her eyes with difficulty. She was awake and coherent. Xingji raised her up and held her against his shoulder so she would be more comfortable. Are you hurting anywhere? Shen Li tugged at Xingji's clothes. Fu Xing, did you capture him? Fu Xing? The one that burned Xing Yan's yard that year. Shen Li clenched her teeth. I hadn't noticed anything amiss at the time, but the events of that night were too well orchestrated. That time we went to Prince Rui's manor, and Xiao He found out about the secret he was keeping from her. There was demonic aura in the air, but I had ignored it. It never occurred to me. At the time, Shen Li had felt a faint demon aura, but had dismissed it thinking that it was coming from those sent by the emperor to retrieve her. Now he's even snatched the land gods and turned them into strange beasts. Just shameful. I don't know how a nobody bastard like him got the audacity to use magic to commit such evil deeds, but when I catch him. Xingji looked thoughtful. He didn't know what he was feeling. He patted her back and said, "First heal your wound. Everything comes later." Shen Li slowly let out a breath. It was an automatic reaction to being held by his side. The realization that she was so relaxed in his presence made her uneasy, so she tried to twist her body away. It's better if I lie down. Xingji acted like he didn't hear and instead moved cold air from his hand into her body. Shen Li assumed he was healing her, so she obediently remained in his embrace and stopped trying to twist away. Is the poison in my body hard to purge? It is somewhat difficult. Although his words were worrisome, his voice was light and relaxed, so Shen Li wasn't worried. Instead she asked, "When can we return to the demon realm?" In time, Xingji answered absent-mindedly. His voice was faint as he spoke. Wait until I reduce the miasma concentration further and after I teach the people here how to dispel the residue. That night Fu Rongjun dismantled the barrier around the temple after the miasma stopped flowing. He took Shi to sit on the rooftop. Do you want to see the stars? She blinked her large, hopeful eyes at him. Is that possible? Fu Rongjun smiled. If you want to see them, I can show you. So saying he waved his hand and a cool breeze blew across the sky. The sheet of miasma hanging above Shi's head disappeared to reveal a clean crisp sky dotted with stars. she gasped in admiration. They really appeared. How pretty! Fu Rongjun gazed at She affectionately. In my eyes, you are as beautiful as the stars. She turned to stare blankly at Fu Rongjun. He held her gaze as his lips slowly descended on hers. She. A loud voice clearly filled with anger yelled out She's name, nearly breaking her eardrums. She turned to the source of the voice at once. She could see Yan standing below them. Rongjun shouted angrily down to Yan before she could say anything. You again? Yan's eyes were like sharp arrows stabbing straight into Fu Rongjun's body. Fu Rongjun was the kind of person to take advantage of the weak, but was himself afraid of those stronger than him. He knew Yan could kill him, but he also knew Yan couldn't act on that desire. In the current situation, all Yan could do was try to kill Fu Rongjun with his fierce glare. He's always like that. Don't pay him any mind. Fu Rongjun said as he took She's hand in his. She drew back and pulled her hand out of his grasp. I should go down. Fu Rongjun moved closer and whispered in her ear. I know you like him, but right now he has another woman. How terrible is that? If you don't let him be a little jealous, a little nervous, you're going to always in the palm of his hands. Fu Rongjun smiled at She with a twinkle in his eyes. Isn't this Lord a master of love? Believe in me. She stared like a hopeful fool at Fu Rongjun. Great Immortal is helping me? Of course. But payment is required. You must reward this lord with a kiss. She's face turned beet red. Waving her hand, she immediately said, I can't. I can't. Fu Rongjun burst out in laughter. You are so fun to tease. He reached for her waist and pulled her against him in an embrace. He turned them around so even their shadows were out of sight. Yan was stunned as he stood below the roof looking up at them. A myriad of emotions washed over him one after the other. Astonishment was quickly replaced by anger only to be shoved aside by a growing sense of panic. It tore at his heart. This girl, that had grown up beside him, that had always belonged to him, was being stolen by this guy. He couldn't contain his panic. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 39. You may want to let the chapters build up and read this later. If you do choose to read and you get confused, just check out the notes. This chapter may need redoing. I'm still not certain I have it all correct, but at this point I don't want to look at it anymore. I'll see how the story unfolds and maybe fix this up later if I notice any inaccuracies. Just be forewarned, you may have to come back and reread the last part of this one. Shen Li's recovery was exceptionally fast. Her body had mostly healed by next morning. When she opened her eyes and looked around, she saw that Luo, the sleeping woman Yan had been caring for, was awake and sitting quietly in a corner. Upon noticing her gaze, Luo waved. Shen Li returned the greeting. Turning in the other direction, Shen Li saw Xingji leaning against a pillar with his eyes closed. A ray of sunshine shone through the torn window paper onto his face. He looked at leisure and idle. In a daze, it reminded Shen Li of the tiny courtyard and the man who habitually sat in his rocking chair under the grape trellis. Shen Li closed her eyes and calmed her thoughts to clear her mind. When she opened them again, she found Xingji staring at her. How is your body? Good. Shen Li purposefully blinked twice, before swiftly standing up and opening the temple door. Morning light streamed in, bathing her in a warm glow. Even without any wind, the miasma had dissipated overnight and the air was considerably cleaner. Shen Li sucked in a deep breath. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were bright and clear. With a slight smile she said, "We didn't catch the mastermind, but to experience this kind of peace is also good." Xingji's shoulders were stiff from sleeping against the pillar all night. He needed his arm. "In my opinion, it's because your highness lacks wisdom and doesn't have nearly enough life experiences." His words came out husky from having just woken up. Shen Li raised her eyebrows at this. "It's strange, but before meeting High God, whether it was on the battlefield or in a personal fight, I have never been injured like this. Suddenly, after meeting High God, every fight hurt and every injury is serious." She continued in a semi-mocking tone. "Can't say for sure, but if this continues, I might even die. If that happens, High God better be ready to make proper compensation." Xingji laughed. "Utter nonsense." Shen Li turned her head to look at him. Now joking she said, "I hate to say this, High God, but my body is very precious." Xingji stood up and patted his clothes, arranging the fabric carelessly to one side before speaking. "Should that day come, then I, Xingji, will compensate you for the loss." Shen Li didn't expect him to say such a thing. She stared blankly at him for a moment before smiling and shaking her head. What could she say to that? "Ah!" Came an alarmed cry came from outside the temple. Shen Li recognized Xi's voice immediately. Lu was still sitting quietly in her corner when the cry rang out. She leaned forward to look outside. With her brows still wrinkled, Shen Li stepped through the doors. She hadn't reached the source of the noise when a clamor broke out. Many people were standing in a circle and whispering as they watched. She stood inside the circle. Her voice sounded anxious as she cried out. "Brother Yan! What are you doing?" Shen Li broke through the crowd just in time to see Rongjun thrown to the ground. Instead of looking embarrassed, he looked pleased with himself, as though he'd just gotten his way with something wicked. Standing next to him was Yan. Though he looked sallow, his body was emitting a great aura of murderous intent. It was as though he was trying to kill Rongjun with the power of his gaze alone. She moved to stand in front of Rongjun, blocking him from view. She resentfully said, "Brother Yan. That's too much." Yan's face was cold. "Get out of the way. Today is the last straw." Rongjun coolly said, "Your good senior brother is very violent, little she." Shen Li didn't have to think about it, she could tell what was happening immediately. Her expression was cold as she stepped forward and kicked Rongjun in the butt. "What is this? Stand up. Stop and harassing people." Angry, Rongjun turned around to see who kicked him. His anger turned into surprise when he saw it was Shen Li. He said, "Tough guy. That was a fast recovery." Xingji slowly walked over. Seeing this, Rongjun gasped and energetically sprang up into a proper standing position. He waved his hand, shooing away the people who were watching. "That's enough. There's nothing more to see here. Return home." The crowd dispersed, but one person remained behind. When she caught sight of who it was, her expression froze, and she dropped her head in silence. Yan watched as she lowered her head. He turned to find Lu standing there, her face getting paler by the second as she looked at them. He stared in surprise at her. Though the angry expression on his face softened, his hands curled into fists. Xingji had a slight smile playing on his lips as he reached the group. Rongjun, this play ended so quickly, I didn't get to see it." Rongjun's lips twitched. "High God Xingji, yesterday you commanded me to leave for heaven post-haste. I, Rongjun, wouldn't dare delay even a little bit." "Oh? Now you want to leave?" Hearing this made Yan's heart boil with rage. He pulled his sword out of its scabbard and aimed it at Fu Rongjun's belly. Ignoring the danger, she hurriedly interposed herself between the two. "What are you doing?" Yan curved the sword mid-air and threw it to the ground. The loud clang of the sword surprised both she and Sherlua. She stared in stunned silence at the normally calm and reserved Yan. It seemed he could no longer restrain himself. In an angry voice he yelled, "Why don't you tell me what you were doing? Staying out all night with some strange guy?" She stared blinking at Yan for some time before replying. "Lord Immortal showed me the sky." Yan's face turned green. Shen Li glanced doubtfully at Fu Rongjun as she asked, "Seriously?" Fu Rongjun brought two fingers up in a gesture of an oath. "Of course, yes." He glanced at Yan. "Little Shi's senior brother is full of fire, isn't he? Was jealousy nibbling at his bones when he couldn't find her the entire night?" She looked at Yan with bright, hopeful eyes. Yan's own eyes were dark and hard to read. He shot a glance at Sherlua, but otherwise didn't say anything. The hopeful light in Shi's eyes dimmed considerably. She had the sudden urge to ask him why he cared so much about Miss Sherlua. He had told her there was a reason, but hadn't told her what it was. Xingji spoke up, breaking the silence. What he said stunned everyone. "All this flirting is quite dizzying. The ladies must be tired. Young Master Yan, will you take a walk with me?" All eyes turned to him. Laughing he said, "Please do not misunderstand. I simply wish to take a walk." There were no people, wildlife, or heavenly beings in the woods outside the temple. Together, the two walked in silence, their steps taking them farther and farther away from the building. Finally, Xingji spoke. "Young Master Yan is studying under the Tao to learn magic, correct?" Yan hesitated but answered frankly. "Honestly speaking, I'm ashamed of myself. I have followed my master since I was a child, but I haven't learned the slightest bit of magic. My master says I don't have an affinity for it, so I can only learn some martial arts." Xingji silently walked 2 more steps before speaking. "If young Master Yan wishes, there is a spell I can teach. This spell can force poisonous miasma out of the body. Is young Master Yan interested?" "I want to learn, but If young Master Yan wishes to learn, then it will surely be a success." Xingji stopped moving and raised an arm up to lightly touch Yan's forehead. Bright light flowed forward. It encompassed all of Yan's vision and engulfed his body. Yan's eyes had turned an awe-inspiring, bright, lively silver. Though the smile on Xingji's face was slight, it was clear it was a happy one. Qingyi, spoiler, it's been a while. My old friend Xingji. Qingyi, Yan, sighed. I didn't think we would ever meet again. Had it not been for the young ladies of the past generation intersecting, I would never have known your reincarnated form. Xingji shook his head. The forces of the heavenly Tao are powerful. It's only because I am a god that I am here now. But even as a god, I am unable to peer in or deviate from the path set. To be able to find you is already truly fated. Qingyi laughed a small bitter laugh. Before I was naive and behaved frivolously, but with each passing generation, I understand how binding the heavenly Tao is. All of us, you and I, without exception, are just grains of dust and sand. Fortune and strength are all bestowed by the heavens. It will give and it will take. No matter who you are, it is fruitless to resist." He sighed. "My friend Xingji, the heavenly Tao will not like you rousing my godhead. It is surely not good idea. I won't do anything unnecessary beyond this, but will you allow your present incarnation to use your meridians to learn a miasma dispelling technique?" Xingji paused before continuing with, also open your heavenly eye and look through your previous lives. Find the one you have been seeking. This way your red thread won't continue to be wrongly entangled. Qingyi laughed. Contrary to popular belief, you quite like to meddle, don't you? This matter won't be looked upon favorably by the heavens. That made Xingji laugh. There's one more thing I want to ask you. Do you remember a person named Fu Xing? Qingyi muttered to himself. A little bit. In the early days back before I was king spoilers and the crown prince was scheming various murders, I heard there was an advisor by that name. This Fu Xing person played a crucial role in the fight for the throne between myself and the crown prince. I remember he was executed. Is there a person in this generation that resembles him? This, he thought for some time before replying. Oh. There really is a person. In this life, I was orphaned at a young age after my parents suffered some misfortune. I survived 2 years of hardship before meeting a young lady. With her help, I was able to escape the misfortune following me. Then I chanced to meet She's parents, but at the same time, the young lady who helped me before passed away. Thinking about things now, the person who harmed my parents really did resemble Fu Xing. Xingji was silent. A cold light had settled in his eyes as he thought over Qingye's words. As he did this, Qingye's silvery light eyes began to fade. With a small smile, Qingyi said, "Your spiritual powers can only hold me here for so long. It is time for me to bid you farewell. I do not know when we will meet again. Take care of yourself, my friend." Xingji's eyes darkened, but he laughed nonetheless. "And you as well." The brilliant light faded and Yan fell to his knees. Xingji supported him. "Try touching the ground." Yan's body was so weak he didn't really have much choice but to brace his hands on the ground. He noticed his palms were warm. Upon looking down, he saw the ground directly under his touch was purified. This is? Purification technique, Xingji said. Your ability just woke up, so you'll suffer some discomfort. Go back and rest. You'll be able to eliminate the poison from the others in a few days. Yan was amazed. He jogged back to the temple as soon as he was able to stand up. After watching Yan's figure disappear, Xingji picked up a stone and threw it at a tree behind him. How long does your highness intend to stand there? Shen Li slowly came out from behind the tree. She cleared her throat before speaking. I was just out on a casual stroll. Xingji laughed. Is that so? Then why not accompany me in my walk? Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 40. The bare tree branches lent a desolate feeling to the forest. It felt like late autumn. Throughout their walk, though Shen Li remained silent, she kept looking askance at Xingji. He couldn't help but finally laugh out loud. So hesitant. This is not the Azure Sky King I know. Unable to hide her curiosity once the silence was broken, Shen Li asked, Heaven's matter I do not know much about. However, this I do know. Today in heaven, there is only one God. But just now with Jing Qing? What was that? I am the only one now. However, a long time ago, there were other gods in the heaven beyond the heavens other than myself. Xingji's eyes became distant. For you, it would be considered the days of ancient antiquity. Even I, myself, cannot to remember how long ago. The smile on his lips became indifferent as he continued, Yan was the previous generation's Prince Rui. He was the beautiful god, silver hair, silver eyes, Qingyi. He was my close friend. Shen Li gave him a sidelong glance. She had been giving him many as they walked, but this time she was appraising his appearance. His beauty was the kind that would elicit envy in others. Without thinking she blurted, "How does High God compare?" Xingji tilted his head to the side and shot her a glance. An enchanting smile played on his lips. He answered in a smug, boastful voice. "Naturally, I am more beautiful." Instead of offending her, his complacent tone only served to make her laugh. "I also agree." Her frank agreement surprised Xingji. He stared at her, but she was already focused on another topic. "What happened? Why is your friend no longer a god?" "He fell in love with a mortal." Xingji's eyes dimmed again. "He moved against the heavens and used his powers to save the person. His godhead was abolished because of it." In surprise Shen Li asked, Who could possibly punish a god? Gods are subject to the laws of the heavenly Tao at birth. These laws are meant to keep balance and order. The world would fall into chaos if the gods used their power for personal reasons. He turned to look at Shen Li. "The heavens are no different from the rest of the world." He continued walking as he spoke from the side. Qingyi was stripped of his godhead and sent to live in the mortal realm, to suffer through the wheel of reincarnation, to tragically fail in love. Shen Li thought of Prince Rue and his plight, of how in the end he couldn't be with either of the women he cared about. Now as Yan, he also had two females by his side, but a sense of misgiving grew in her heart. Who did the person he loved reincarnate as? He's the only one who knows that. All I did was awaken his divinity and cleared the obstruction in his spiritual force. If he can find the one he's been searching for, then all will be well. Xingji looked skyward. "I only hope the heavenly Tao will not be excessive and terminate everything." Shen Li stopped and looked at Xingji. "I do not believe the matter is as complicated as that. Qingye's godhead is gone, but it does not mean the heavens will negatively interfere with the course of his lives. As Prince Rue, he and the princess shared a common fate. Naturally, he was fond of the princess. But in this life, he is Jing Yan. And in this life he grew up with Jing Shi. It's obvious he cherishes her. The two generations are not related. His destiny is mainly in the hands of fate, however he still has free will. And that free will's influence will impact his fate." Xingji also stopped, turning to look at her. "That is a novel idea. But no matter how you phrase it, all of Yan's previous lives served to shape him into the person he is now. His feelings have evolved from that. Neither you nor I can influence the matter. We can only observe." Shen Li silently mulled his words over. Changing topic, she said, "Just now you said Qingye's godhead was abolished, yet you chose to awaken it. Aren't you afraid of incurring heaven's wrath?" The offense Qingyi committed was not a heinous one. So though heaven made him mortal as punishment, his body more or less still retains the same aura. I failed to notice it because it had dispersed so much. It was when you asked if they were bound to repeat their fates that I became suspicious and began looking at the situation more closely. Though his aura was incredibly weak, I was able to draw it out. It is sufficient to purify the miasma in the people's body." He paused and smiled. "As for heaven's wrath, escaping it is impossible. Judgment will be passed for all offenses. If any change at all incurred heaven's wrath, then why not make a great change and make it worthwhile?" The words were on the tip of Shen Li's tongue, but she swallowed them back. Based on what Xingji said, Qingyi, because of his heart. She remembered the night she returned drunk to the manor. Xingji had smiled as he talked about gods not having emotions like affection or kindness. She realized what he said wasn't true. It wasn't that the gods didn't have emotions, it was that they couldn't show their emotions. Xingji hid the expression in his eyes and smiled at the silent Shen Li. That's enough for our walk. We should return. The moon shone brightly in the clear night sky over Yangzhou. Lamps were lit along the city walls, and though not as glorious as in the past, they nevertheless brought the character of the city back to life. Rongjun had obediently returned to the demon realm to relay the message from Xingji. But he only left after making sure Yan drank a good amount of vinegar. In his own way, Rongjun was sincerely trying to help Shi with her romance, but considering his lecherous nature, Shen Li knew it wasn't the only reason. She was sure he had enjoyed taking advantage of Shi in the process. She was sad to see him leave. She had taken his efforts to assist her seriously. It wasn't just she, many of the other girls in the temple also wore glum expressions and were sighing sadly. The sight only made Shen Li indignant. Rongjun had failed to start anything with Mo Feng when he was in the demon realm. Once in the mortal realm, he switched targets and fooled around with every girl he could find. He was the epitome of a fickle, insincere person. Such a lecherous, unfaithful person. He won't change no matter where he goes. Shen Li's disdain showed easily in her words. Xingji was just getting up after driving the miasma out of the body of a middle-aged man when he heard Shen Li cursing Rongjun. He turned and saw several women. They were wearing white cloth that he recognized were made by the heavenly temple's craftsmen. The fabric had to be left behind by Rongjun. He left the place a mess. Shen Li thought about the pain the girls would go through. Clearly that idiot didn't have anything to do with clearing the miasma in the city. Is your highness mad? Rongjun got credit for it? The demon realm isn't free and unfettered like the heavenly realm. There are constantly campaigns to be fought, and because of this our system for reward and punishment is very clear-cut. Meritorious deeds are appropriately credited to those who contribute. Shen Li was good, but she was also very vain. The thing she enjoyed most was the feeling of crushing her enemies underfoot, followed closely by the adoration and cheers of the people. The fact that she didn't get either on this mission rubbed her the wrong way, so of course she was unhappy. I worked hard to settle an affair for the heavenly realm, even getting injured and poisoned in the process. But do I get any credit for it? No. Not one bit. Those in heaven really are generous. Sarcasm. Xingji laughed in spite of himself. Your Highness's contributions have been firmly etched in my memory. I will be sure to relate them to the heavenly emperor upon my return so he can properly reward you. Shen Li glanced at Xingji. I would be happy to issue any rewards if my marriage to Rongjun would be abolished, and I would be glad to slay any number of demonic beasts to make up for any loss. Xingji did not give her a reply. In the silence the sky lit up with a multitude of bright colors. The city walls shook with the resounding boom that immediately followed the lights. Xingji smiled. Shen Li, look. Yangzhou is putting on a fireworks display. Shen Li turned to find several people at the end of the street lighting fireworks. The fireworks flew into the air and burst out in a glorious display of colors. The atmosphere was lively and festive, much like at New Year's. The doors on every house were flung open and people were streaming out of their homes and filling the streets. The city, once dead, was alive again. The man Xingji had healed coughed. It's a new day. Yangzhou is finally alive again. The fireworks made the crowd cheer and the air became celebratory. Shen Li was touched by the display. Whether it was the human world or the demon world, the people looked forward to a bright tomorrow in the same way, their hearts harbored the same simple wishes and desires. Let's go, Xingji said. We should get closer to the celebration, cast off this suffocating air. Shen Li didn't move. Instead she said, "Fireworks are just explosions in the sky. How does it have the power to move people? To make a place come alive?" As she was wondering this, Xingji grabbed her wrist with his own warm hand, and pulled her forward without explanation. She was forced to move in order to keep up. They're celebrating life and giving thanks. Why not celebrate with them? It's not often we get to take part in the mortal realm's celebrations, so while we're here, why not enjoy it? Wait. Xingji pulled Shen Li through the noisy crowd before she could finish her reply. The fireworks burst deafeningly in the sky, popping in fast succession, their tempo increasing after each one. Those in the crowd stared up in wonder and awe, their faces reflecting all the bright colors of the sparks. They cheered exuberantly at each firework, the joy clear in their expressions. Xingji looked like he was enjoying it too, like he was sharing in their joys as well. His robe reflected a rainbow of colors as he dragged her behind him. It was unreal. He didn't seem real. They were in the middle of the crowd when she stopped abruptly and yanked her hand out of his. "You're too beautiful. Don't walk ahead of me." He was too distracting. She couldn't focus on anything else around her. Xingji stopped and focused his attention on her. "Shen Li," he said, but the crowd and the noise drowned out his voice. She leaned in toward him. "What? I can't hear you." She gave him a puzzled look, unable to make out what he was saying. Xingji didn't want to repeat himself again, instead he smiled slightly as he stroked her head. Turning around, he continued to walk in front of her. Shen Li imitated the shape he made with his mouth, thinking carefully about each word, so focused that the world around went quiet. She thought what he said was, perhaps it was her imagination, but she thought he said, "I can protect you."